Good evening, welcome to MOTS presents MOTS Ado About Nothing.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
Where we apply the revolutionary MOTS scale to classic and contemporary literature.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
This podcast contains mature content, spoilers, language. You have been warned.
Welcome back, everyone, once again to MOTS Ado About Nothing. I'm your host, Scott Thurlow, as always. I am joined today by Stephen Amosi.
Hello.
Veronica Hernandez.
Hey.
Sir J. Ian Manzer.
Hello.
And we'll be discussing the short story, The Axiom of Choice, by David W. Goldman, which I originally found in the Nebula Award Showcase from 2013, I believe. It's a short-ish story. It's not quite sci-fi, but we'll get into it. But I believe Steve-O has prepared a humorous synopsis of the story.
This is the story that makes you finally realize that all of your choices mean nothing.
I agree with that, yes. And Veronica has a more plausible synopsis.
Guy makes a choice and has to deal with all of the repercussions that happened after it and his responsibilities. And are they his responsibilities?
If I may, this entire story is frameworked by choose your own adventure novels, except you can only make one choice. So, yeah, it's dealing with choice, but it's dealing with the absurdity of dealing with choices and true free will versus determinism.
Yes.
And that's the synopsis, free will versus determinism.
Yeah, we'll get into that. It's probably one of the themes as well.
Mine's better, Ian.
Absolutely. But
we'll let the viewers decide that.
Alrighty.
But let's jump into it. Steve-O, you can talk about the introduction to the Axiom of Choice, please.
Absolutely. You start off, and this whole story is framed, as Ian just mentioned, as a choose your own adventure. So you start off, and it's all the entire story is in the second person, where you are being spoken to as though it's your choice and what you're doing is in your voice, except for the fact that you have absolutely no choice at all whatsoever because the story railroads you into the choices that you make. So it starts off with you finishing a gig and being at the end of the gig, and you're there with your lead singer, I believe, and there is a rich patron of yours, I guess.
A shady motherfucker,
right, seemingly, who owns a plane and is offering to give you a plane ride to your next gig, which seems interesting to you. And so the first quote-unquote choice that you get is whether you go with the guy or I think the first choice is to...
I'll actually read it if
you... Yeah, go ahead.
If you ask Paul's friend to let you both spend the night here in town on the floor of his apartment, go to section 304. And Paul is your bandmate. Mm-hmm. If the thought of sleeping in until noon is too tempting to pass up, go to section 307. If you choose to go to 304, it says, this would be a different story. Go to section 307.
Right.
And there's the railroading aspect, as you mentioned.
So that's where it kind of kicks off. And
but thou must.
So you make the decision to go take the plane ride, and eventually, after some turbulence and not being sure what happens, your plane crashes. And I would say that's the introduction to the whole story.
I agree with that. When it says you wake up with water on your face.
And it's a really interesting intro. You kind of start seeing that despite the framing device of being able to choose where you go, you see that this is going to be a determinist story where all of your choices are pre-made for you.
Well, maybe, if I may, I don't want to jump the gun, but just broadly, the title itself is of course, misleading. It's sort of a joke, but not, it's an absurd joke, but somewhat of a darker one. I'm not sure how to describe it. He's playing with the conventions of, yes, it's clearly sort of maybe a satire, loosely, of Choose Your Own Adventures, but much more mature, I would say, and sort of messing, because of that requires a certain style and type of writing a story, it allows more room to mess with it. So I think the introduction, it starts off each section is a little numbered, so 310 or 304, whatever it was. So yeah, the old vein, if you do X, go to whatever.
Right.
And you didn't do that,
yeah,
you're going to this section. So that's why I chose this one. It's an interesting little sort of literary, playful little experiment, if you will.
And it's interesting to point out that most often what happens when you have two choices in this, it kind of does away with the, all right, here's a section and you can't do that. It goes into that section just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
For most of the
That
story.
another layer and part of the joke. But
Yeah.
anyways.
Actually, one of the nice things is he keeps throughout updating it. I thought that this mechanic would grow old very
Right.
quickly.
I was going to say that
And
too. It's a joke that may or possibly should get old, but we may say it doesn't.
So in the beginning, they kind of joke that they're even more so that you do have an option. So the first one I already read to you. The second one, regardless of your choice, it leads to the same path. Like whichever section you go to, it's go to the next section.
Right.
This is basically "But Thou Must" the story, which since you just mentioned that, I think another good synopsis.
But then it goes to you when you start losing consciousness, it actually fades off your options, and throughout the options actually really drive a lot of the story because you see what like positive choices you should have made, but you instead had to take the other one, or so it's an element that really works quite well, and surprisingly so.
I would agree. I think that it's interesting. Sorry.
I think the choose your own adventure style, I'm not a big fan of it, but the way that it was presented in this one, again, giving you the idea that you have a choice, and then the very quirky responses when you try and make that maybe safe choice, and they're like, oh well, no, that's not what we're gonna do, and you again get just railed into another choice, and I really enjoyed that. And as Ian said, you would think it gets old, but it gets deeper and deeper as the story gets in, no matter how maybe simple the story is or how it starts off very light, and then it just gets deeper and deeper.
I think two things that sort of it's short enough, but not too short, right? So it has just enough time to not get old. And I think I'll make an analogy that another work that it might not be a 1-to-1 ratio, but he's playing with the style of a certain existing paradigm, if you will. It's almost like a very, very light version of House of Leaves, like being able to use literary conventions to mess with another one that has come before. And even if you're not the biggest fan of, as you said, Veronica, of Choose Your Own Adventures, where the rest of us sort of are, nevertheless, he understands how to use it, even if you're not as familiar again with the basic structure or past ones that were like more took it at face value.
Absolutely, it's not cheesy.
Yes,
it's actually successful in its role.
Right. So we'll speak more about that. But does anyone have anything to say about the intro?
I love Choose Your Own Adventures and Choose Co. Amazing company.
Yes.
Great
Go
introduction.
Choose Co.
I would never sell out.
Never. And read Choose Co.
Anyways,
All right.
let's give the scores. Stevo?
I'm going to give it a 1.
All right. Veronica?
As will I. Very nice introduction to me, who I don't like this. So the fact that it kept
Even
my
beyond that,
attention, very good.
Again, yeah, I thought it was a very good opening, especially it's an intriguing concept. You don't know if it'll work, but I bought into the concept quite a bit. And this is handled differently. I might have been actually very irritated by this story if it was poorly done, but the guy holds his own throughout the entire work, and so in the introduction is a good forward into it.
Yeah, no, I agree, of course. Like, in full disclosure, this is my choice for this evening, so I'm going to say it's a 1. But I thought you guys might find it interesting, given our various experiences and love or sort of indifference to the actual Choose Your Own Adventure style of books. All right, so everyone's giving it a 1, and we'll move on to the body. Veronica?
So the farther you get into the story, again, you're still being given this idea that, yes, you have a choice, and yet you can completely put yourself into the position of the character and say, yeah, I'd probably say I would go with what he's choosing. Yeah, sometimes a rational thought is not what you're going to think at that time in that position. And so I think the body, throughout it, you want to think as the audience, don't do that, don't choose that, don't why?
It's maybe like a horror movie in that sense.
Don't open that door. Don't go into that room. Yes, don't do these things. They're clearly going to only do more damage to you than you already are. The character, suffers these really big changes. His hands are, he's missing fingers on his one hand, the other, and he's a guitarist.
I was going to say, which matters more to his profession and passion.
He could have lost a leg, and I'm probably sure that it would have affected him less than
Sure.
the fact that he lost his
They would
fingers.
have accepted that beyond, like, versus using fingers.
And to
Absolutely.
that point, when you mentioned earlier about the rational thought, there's one where he's like, "Oh, I should have learned." Like another guitarist I know burned his hand, and
Yes.
he learned to play the guitar. The opposite, like that's one of the choices that you can't take.
Right.
You take
It's another
the
false...
self-destructive path. So
It's a nice downward spiral, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. I
It sure
enjoyed
does.
reading it, no matter how bad that sounds. It was an enjoyable ride, if nothing else. So I'm going to give the body a 1 because it certainly kept my attention.
Yeah, I mean, it so the body, I guess we should go maybe a little bit into what happens.
Sure.
Like, so it's kind of his story of his descent into, like,
And then in the
Not
wake of the
rock
crash.
bottom.
yeah, he just gets very depressed, starts drinking a lot. That leads to, him running out of money because he doesn't have a job and he has all these hospital bills to pay. And then he descends into homelessness.
Becomes a walking cliche of the starving homeless
And
artist.
I would say the ending comes about. I don't know. Would you guys say when
when the
discuss it right
redheaded
now.
nurse
Right.
Yes,
picks him
finds
up,
him.
when he
Yes.
goes into when he starts to his road to recovery, I guess
Yes.
you would say.
you actually watch him bounce between being homeless, going into shelters, rejecting therapy.
Right.
Actually, it's very interesting and almost realistic to see people trying to help until he's wanting to get help himself.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing anyone does matters,
he
yeah.
just rejects the people with well intention, other people who. At the end, he's picked up by a nurse who helps him recover. But before that, other people are serving that role, but he's just leaving the shelter in order to return to the streets. He's posing as a homeless veteran who got wounded in war in order to get money from people. It's very tragic, and you get to see the options the choices that could save him,
Right.
But his rejections of those.
At all these points where he could have made he could have started on a more positive path earlier, and perhaps saved himself a lot of grief, but he chooses not to, and you can see it kind of shows the way that these downward spirals perpetuate themselves.
There's also another sub kind of section, which is him back in college before he dropped out to pursue a career as a musician. He kind of had a relationship with this redheaded.
Well, he had a crush on her.
No, that part didn't actually
Yeah.
happen.
Oh, did not.
That
Yeah,
was one
so
of the
that
alternate
was-
choices. Yeah, we'll get
That
into
was
that,
like
yeah.
when
What could have been?
there's a point in the story where he is at
He's in therapy or group
a
therapy.
group therapy session,
recall.
and they say, "Go back to a point in your life that you could have made a different choice." And he thinks to himself, or you think to yourself, the obvious choice is to go back and not get on the plane, but instead you
You're
go back.
railroaded to another choice.
Instead, you're railroaded back to college in this philosophy class, where instead of saying that this is all bullshit
And dropping out.
and dropping out, you continue on with the class, and you meet this girl, and you guys fall in love, and it goes in this whole other story. And then what I love about that part is it's like the whole framing section for it is the therapy class. It's like, all right, for 10 minutes, think about what your choices or where your choices would led. And at some point when you're like about to achieve like some kind of happiness in life, or like a further happiness in your make believe life, it's the word if,
Yes.
I think, and then it just cuts off,
Cuts
and
to the
it's
next
like,
section.
and 10 minutes are over, and like
Yeah.
the therapist said, and 10 minutes are over. So like it kind
and
of
then he
cuts it off,
decides to
and you're
not go back to that.
Yeah, so it's sort of like, it's an exercise that they're trying to impart to the groups, and like, think back to your life a moment. And so it's sort of like, we said this about a couple other works perhaps here and there, but it may be approaching too clever for its own good, but doesn't quite get there. I think it toes the line within what it's trying to do well enough throughout that those little moments were perfect. Like the thing we said earlier when he wakes up from the plane crash and then he goes unconscious again. So it sort of it trails off, and then you wake up in the next section. Same thing. The guy tells you to close your eyes and imagine your life at a different point. Oh, you like the obvious choice is to go back to the plane crash, and you don't do that choice. You then have like a little sort of dream vignette of what could have been, and then he's slapped awake from it back to reality. So yeah, I just thought those were nice little moments. And again, Goldman used the conventions to play with those in a sense. Like it's again, I said it was a joke. It's not a joke. He's just playing with the conventions within a certain narrow range of the medium. and I think quite well
Right.
throughout. So I definitely am going to give the body a 1.
I will as well.
Me too.
All right.
I'm going to give it a 1 as well, yep.
That brings us to the conclusion, Ian, which I think we just decided where it starts at least.
So he meets this. Basically, he's asleep on a park bench.
He's a homeless bum now on a
Yes.
bench.
And a redheaded nurse who probably he goes with her.
I'm not sure if she's a nurse
Because-
or not. She's like a care worker
Yeah,
or
social
something.
worker. But I think because it reminds her of,
Right,
this girl
of his
in the back.
dream crush, yes.
And she's kind of, I feel, it's more real about the recovery than she's not giving him the same old like platitudes.
Right.
Right.
So he ends up kind of buying into it, and she ends up taking him to a concert to watch this. And he actually starts having like he has issues when dealt with music because it reminds him of all the things that he lost, and he gets on the road to recovery. And I think that's where you start seeing the choices that he wasn't making, that he should have made prior, that he wasn't making. You start seeing him take those paths.
It does like a
And-
U-turn, essentially, yeah.
So, yeah, it's a nice little metaphor at the end, and nice little use of mechanics to really drive home the point. And that's, just,
Yeah.
he's on the road to recovery.
It sort of closes off. So, like, I think that he does a really good reversal. Not quite a subversion, I guess, but because of the nature, as we just said, throughout the whole body, do you do choice X or Y? Oh, X, nope, sorry, you do Y instead.
Right.
Or both are moot anyways. Then at the end, there's 4 choices, and of course it doesn't end at all. It just is,
Right.
is
Well,
open.
I think it ends on the words "you choose," right?
And you choose, yeah.
Yeah.
Is it the final
and you
sentence?
choose, yeah.
So yeah, that's a really nice touch. I think it just sort of ties the whole thing together, if you will.
But even to the point of, and you choose, it's led off by offering 4
choices.
different...
Yeah, like I said.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think he pulled off that ending quite well. Again, it's somewhat of subversion, given that's what has come before.
Sure.
So
Yeah, that opens it up for sure. The ending to that opens the story up much more than it has been open this entire time. Like this, and throughout the story, they talk about, there are certain parts where philosophy is discussed, and they
we'll
talk
get
about
to that very soon. Yeah.
well, as far as the end, as
Sure.
far as the very very end goes, it goes away from this strict determinism and allows you in your mind to choose which path you take.
Absolutely.
So at the beginning of the story, there was also a very brief introduction about why the author got this idea for this
It
story.
was an anecdotal little story. Yeah.
Right. He went to a concert. He heard the performer say something along the lines of,
He was singing a song about like traveling, like being a traveler.
sometimes people, they always come
People
back.
always come
People
back.
eventually come back. And then someone in the audience leaned in and said, sometimes they don't, though. And the writer thought, well, there's a story to be told there. And I really liked how he kind of was able to close it back on that one scene. I feel it was, you mentioned earlier, Scott, that it was kind of coming like a U-turn, Ian, but also coming full circle. And I really liked how you're like, oh, okay, I see where he was going with that. I thought it was just a stereotypical, okay, there's a performer and he's the story.
It was a
he's
callback to it. Yeah.
doing all of this. And I really liked how it all came back around and it made sense.
Even more to that point, he thought it was Paul's widow.
Yes.
Obviously,
Yeah.
it probably
He
wasn't,
imagined it, but it could have been.
Yeah.
I think
Maybe.
that's an outright line. But either way, it was a sort of like a callback echo to that. So let's give the actual scores. I'm giving it a 1 to conclusion.
Yeah, I'm
Is
going to
anyone
give it a 1.
not giving it a 1?
No, that was a pleasant one.
All right. A
Pleasant
one.
one.
Well,
That's
here we
a
go.
first.
Again, this is a couple of recent cats we had where the theme of the story is sort of the crux of it. And I think this certainly is the case. Like, even the title is a little play, a little, wink and a nod, and sets you up for where it's going to go. It, of course, and it even outright name checks it when the scene that Steve-O mentioned when he's in the college philosophy class about the professor lecturing on free will versus determinism. And that is a rather huge theme because, of course, it's one of the greatest themes, I think, as humanity we can ponder. And it's unanswered, of course. And the story sort of plays with the idea of that, offering you a choice, but no, you don't really have one, but maybe you do. It sort of like slithers back and through both options.
In this sense, I believe the titular thing was an actual,
Yep.
as was a
You're right.
mathematical concept.
That is true as well.
That
yeah.
because the redhead that
Right.
becomes his girlfriend in his
In his
dreams
fantasy, yes, he's dating the math major redhead.
Yeah, is a math major, and she gives him this. I wish I could recall.
I'll
that.
do it for you. Here
Yeah,
it is. The
so
axiom
good.
of choice in mathematics is this. Let's say you have a number of sets, each of which is different from another. How can you turn those sets into a set unto themselves?
Right.
So it's like he
I think it's without dumping them all into one
yes,
set.
you
right?
have to make a new set out of those sets.
Right.
Is what I believe it is. And how you do that is just pick one random thing from each set of existing sets, and therefore you have a new set.
And but the really interesting thing about that is that there's no mathematical reason
Right.
why you can do that or why it works.
It's neither allowed nor disallowed.
Right.
But they allow for it because you're able to then build more upon the.
I think what the story says is that mathematicians agree that you can do this because it quote unquote feels right, which I doubt is a very mathematical explanation of it.
Interesting.
But I think that it touches on the way that came to be.
Yes, I'll read that to you. And of course, I like that as inclusion as a student of math, even though
Right.
I'm not great at it. But I'll read you the line. Carrie is his imagined girlfriend. Says to him about what he's just answered to her. The axiom choice is not one of the rules, not one of the most basic defining ones anyway. You can build up a complete self-consistent system of mathematics that doesn't include the axiom of choice. But if you add it in, you end up with a slightly different system, one that includes lots of new, interesting results, most of which, italicized, feel right. So most mathematicians are fine with proofs that depend on the axiom of choice. So basically, it exists, like you can have it, but math does not demand it.
Yeah, but you don't need it, right? So
Yes.
that's like the human addition to like math, which is really strange.
It's the counterpart to free will,
Right.
Which of course is like again one of the major themes.
And that's the crux of I think
I
all
think.
the
But they
themes.
also bring up Boethius, although I'm probably mispronouncing his name, who was a Roman, not really, he's very late Rome, 500 AD. He was during the reign of the Ostrogoths, actually was killed by them.
Okay.
But he wrote The Consolation of Philosophy. And he wrote quite a bit about the idea of free will and determinism, but not in the sense of how modern day kind of free will and determinism works. While he wasn't strictly a proponent of Christianity, his entire thing was how can God have influence in our lives and we still have free will? And he wrote quite a bit about that. So if you want to look at it this way, we are the gods, or the author is the god of this person's life. Mm-hmm. He has the illusion of choice,
Right.
and it's strict. You're in retrospect you can see other options, but you're down the path. And again, this is one of my major problems. He's bringing up a lot of concepts, but doesn't really do anything.
Yeah, he
with
breezes
them.
through them, sure.
Well,
but
I
I agree
mean,
with that.
I think the idea is that, as far as that goes, is that you, the character you, have this idea that you're making choices at each one of these turns. However, you're not actually. You have to, so there's a character you, and then there's you as a reader who is realizing that you're being railroaded, and, it's made obvious to you. But as far as you're invested in this character who is supposed to be, quote-unquote, you, the idea is that as a person, you think that you're making, that character you thinks that you are making those choices. It's very confusing.
No, well, that's the idea of free will versus determinism itself.
But I think that's the
Yeah,
whole point.
I think the issue is he brings up a number of complicated issues
and sort of drops them
and
along the
then,
way. Yeah, I do see that.
It never came across as, oh, look how smart I am. It more came across as, I went to college.
I heard of
learned
this thing.
concept,
Yeah, I get it.
I want to bring it up briefly, and then, I get what he's trying to talk about, but it doesn't go anywhere. And I think I just thematically it's like reading half a philosophy paper, or I guess I feel like I read I'm a professor of philosophy reading a student's philosophy paper on something I taught them, where it's not quite have the full grasp.
Not to the level of it. Yeah, I get it, but
so I can't fault him for that, but I do fault him for that, and I'm going to fault him for that.
I see what you mean, but it's again like at the end of the day, there's sort of like a literary game that he's playing, like using those sort of like throwing them into a blender and touching upon aspects of them. Yes, while I agree fully not delving all that deeply into them, but introducing them at least, and but using that idea at the very least as a framework for a somewhat entertaining story, and perhaps like if the commentary itself is not all that impactful, it's still there at least. So I see what you mean, but I think I'm going to give it leaning on giving it more credit than not in this sense.
I would agree. In reading this story, it certainly made me think a good amount about the themes of free will, determinism, whether or not these choices that are being made for you were ever actually choices.
Right.
But I mean that's kind of what he's getting at. I don't think he's trying to like lay down a philosophy paper for you. I think he's trying to get you to think about these things. And also, if he's dropping like little hints of things to, maybe go look up on your own time, like he's not trying to like show you what you should think or give you a entire synopsis of the philosophy of free will versus determinism. He's just trying to say, hey, here's a small argument for and against determinism in this short story.
By railroading you, he's not railroading you, apparently.
I don't know. I feel like I have to agree with Ian about this because
it's valid. Sure.
It was like
I
a
can see both
trailer
sides.
as far as the theories that he was mentioning throughout the entire story, where it's enough where, okay, it's interesting, I see how it fits into it, but I'm pretty sure there's more to it than just this. It's like a trailer where I'll be able to briefly, see what's going on, but am I really going to go really in depth and research this? It's enough that it'll fit the story. It's a tool. That's
It's surfacely mentioned. Sure, I can go read Sam Harris's Free Will, and it'll be much more in depth than the story, of course, philosophically wise.
Yeah, but most Sam Harris fans don't have free will.
Well, that's what Free Will says to. So we'll discuss that at a later date. But regardless, yeah, of course, he's just sort of like dropping in the concept and not, like I said, not exploring it. But that isn't necessarily the point. It's sort of like there to be used as a springboard, again, as a sort of literary game he's playing as a story.
I don't know if he's not exploring it. He's not like giving you a thesis. He's not like
You're right.
dropping a paper on you. He's certainly exploring the idea of free will versus determinism, and like with every choice that is made for you, that's the entire idea.
It seems like
But I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, go right ahead. Go right ahead. Ian,
Someone go.
All right. You're arguing that he's attempting to present all these ideas, but it's a story, so it doesn't have to go deeper
Necessarily.
I'm not saying
You're
saying
saying
that's
it's
kind of you're excusing.
saying it's a cop out, kind of.
I feel that he's
No, that's not what I'm
doing.
saying.
That's what he's saying. You're saying it is.
Yeah, but that's how what I feel that you're excusing it by like saying he doesn't need like his intention. I think his intention was to give you an introduction to metaphysics story, or at least about causality. But then didn't he? I don't know. It didn't work for me, and this is where I'm going.
Yeah, that's
for
fair
it.
enough.
Well, basically, what I'm saying is that he's not writing a textbook for you to learn all about metaphysics. What he's doing is saying, here are some ideas. Here is a way to think about them. Like, you think that you have choice, but you really don't, maybe. Or at the end, perhaps you do.
Right. I see both sides of your viewpoint. I just happen to probably side a bit more with Steve-O, but yours, both of you, Veronica and Ian, are completely valid. Just that, again, like, it's the subjective nature of it. My free will or determinism is going to make me give it a 1.
I'm going to give it a determinist 0.
All right. And
We give it a
Steve-O?
free will 1.
All right. I will choose free will, and I will choose 1.
And Veronica?
I will have to say 0 as well.
Yes. All right. That's bringing us to antagonists. Go ahead, Steve-O.
All right, I guess the antagonist is fate.
It's either free will or determinism, depending on where you fall.
Or if you're following with his reference to the Roman philosopher, God, like the idea of God giving you
Whatever
determinist
drives your life, that, or at least that you think is.
Well, I don't think that God is really part of this story.
God is always an antagonist in the same way society is,
But again,
of course. But
he referenced it twice. This philosopher who made the big argument that determinism is the result of God's. Well, and more so, it's that it was him rationalizing how basically bad things can happen to good people, and it was very influential Middle Ages. But the idea is that if we're supposed to believe in an omnipotent, benevolent God who controls our lives, why does misfortune happen? And he wrote it while in prison for being being against the government at the time.
But this sounds like an atheist text.
Well, no, but it's very much a religion. He spent his life trying to bridge the Roman Church, let's see, it was influential in the Roman Church and the Byzantine Church before the Great Schism actually happened. So again, this is like you have a very religious. He keeps referencing this philosopher and who has this very prominent theme about religion. So I feel that there has to be that role there.
I don't know if it was like prominent. Like I didn't really notice it. Like I remember like. Again, like you said, it's almost like he's name dropping. Like, oh, I've heard of this guy, and he said this. At least that's what I know of it, and I'll just move on. Yeah, I totally get that. It's just I didn't look into it as deeply. Again, like, if I may make a joke, if I want to hear your philosophy bullshit, I'm going to section 308, which doesn't fucking exist. But like, I don't mean to discount your point. I just think I fall again on the opposite scale.
If you reference it twice in your short work, I think there's a meaning.
There's enough to it.
I would say there certainly is a meaning to it, and I think the meaning was that in this case, I think you probably are closer to hitting the nail on the head than I think that you were in the last one.
All right.
In the last one we talked about in the themes, but like I think that reference is more of like a. Hey, this guy has a tangential like argument to make about this type of thing. Like let's throw him in there because I think it'll be clever.
Sure, I guess we're getting to like. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
But I don't think that you can name God as the antagonist because of some philosopher that he threw in as like a name drop. I do think that the like antagonist of this is his fate, his either whether free will or determinism exists. I would say that your fate is either to choose poorly or to be determined that you're going to be like homeless because of this plane accident you had.
He's either his antagonist or fate is the antagonist.
Yes, that's what I was trying to get at. Yeah. So even if God is it, like God may well equal chance or fate, either one, whatever you want to slap on there, or you yourself are it. I agree with that one. So I guess it depends which one you get out of it. But I think actually, having said that about it, I think both can be effective. Mm-hmm. Like it's the same thing as choosing whether you fall on the side of free will versus determinism in the debate of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I mean I don't really have much more to say.
I think his free will is the antagonist. I think that he's constantly
if you fall on that side, if you believe we have free will.
Well, I think that that's what he's battling through the entire thing, and so it's something that's fighting him the entire time because he wants to make this choice, and somehow it's always the wrong choice because he just keeps going farther and farther.
But he never has free will if you.
And/or he's fighting himself. Yeah,
by
free will, it's his free will.
We should put ourselves into these shoes because that's what you're supposed to be.
That's what I'm.
Perhaps a little bit more difficult for you, Veronica, because I know that it's clear that the main character is a man. So, and you are not a man. So, like putting yourself. Although I'm not a guitarist, so regardless, I guess it's the same thing.
Well, no, but I think that you can, like you said, you can put yourself in his shoes because we all have our demons. So I think that
we've all had our fingers taken by
the story is
maybe not as drastic. We don't have to go there, Ian. But I mean, everyone I think could put their put these shoes on.
The story is railroading you, of course, to doing that. But this speaks to the next question. I think, like, essentially, it's forcing you to be the protagonist in quotes because, again, the nature of it. But you sort of are and are not because you're experiencing it secondhandly.
Before we delve into that, though, I'm just say I'll give a 1 for antagonists.
Yeah, let's fire up protagonists. All right, I'm going to give it a 1 as well. Steve, what did you finally decide?
As far as
antagonist,
I'll give it a 1.
And Veronica?
A 1 as well.
All right.
Hold on. Before we go any further,
go on.
You got finish up.
Is it actually made clear that this is a man, or am I just like really biased?
It's that you have to assume then if you're entering a lesbian relationship with Carrie.
I mean, that's
if you're
possible.
a woman. But I think she mentions. I don't know. You're right. It might not be actually made
I don't
clear.
know if it's like now that I'm
You might
thinking
just
back on
assume
it.
it.
I'm like, I might.
We just discovered another level. of the
It might be.
actual
It might be the old doctor riddle or whatever.
Steve-O, you're the antagonist of women.
Man, I feel
Well,
like a
in the story
jerk.
of life, there it is. But either way, we've answered
Wait,
antagonists at least. Go on. You got
It
one more
was
thing?
about protagonist, though.
Okay. Well, we're starting on that.
Yeah, we already talked a bit about it. So I actually never pictured myself in the story. I actually had an image for the character in my head, even though they were referencing you constantly.
Right.
And yes, it worked for the immediacy of certain situations, but it was always, I never got that second person.
You're saying it's sort of like I largely agree, 90% agree, I guess, if I randomly pick a number. Like, you're sort of removed from it more than you perhaps they intended you to be or wanted you to be, or you would have been in an actual choose-your-own-adventure.
Yes.
So, yeah, like I said, you both are and are not the protagonists, but because of the way it's structured, because of the second-person use of addressing the reader, it's trying to force you. Again, it's trying to do best it can to railroad you into it, depending on how much you are or not grabbed by it.
I kind of feel the same way, where it's like I had this, obviously, because I just said, well, I guess if I was putting myself in there, it would be a man, but I had this idea of who the protagonist was, or who quote unquote you were supposed to be, and nothing like ever really shook that the entire way through. But I don't know if you, like, quote unquote you again, was particularly effective as a protagonist. Like, I felt like
I completely agree with you.
I feel like everything else was really interesting about this.
Well, that's what I'm
other
saying. It
than
depends
the
how much you buy into
main
it or
character.
Especially since they gave you the options and you saw and you just get frustrated with this person.
Yeah,
You're like, I hate my character. I want to re-roll.
yeah.
I get it, but
Like, you can kind of see where these choices came from, but they aren't the choices that I would have made.
well, that's kind of the whole point. It goes back to theme, so I don't want to circularly return to it, but
Right.
I think it's still somewhat pertinent to this.
Yeah. So
What we're saying is it depends on how much where you fall on buying into it, how it grabs you, or where you sort of remove yourself from it and actually see it as a character and not you, in quotes, being placed into it.
Right.
I think it would be you. I think it continually asks you to make the choice, and whether it's being forced upon you, which is the case in the story, I think you are trying to make the better
You're supposed
choice,
to
and
do
yet
that,
you
yeah.
still can understand the wrong choice, though.
But I would say that you're far more removed from this character in this than you are from your own choices, which
Well, that's what I
may
said.
or may not be determined.
Right.
I think that in this, it's very obvious that this is not actually you. Which I don't know how you would make it more like.
Sure. Well,
Like,
it's,
I don't
again,
know how you would make it feel like they're your choices when you're railroaded into the choice.
It's just
that
a
you're making,
vehicle
but-
for it to explore it, in a sense. So it depends on what side of the fence you fall on. So let's decide which side.
I mean, in War with the Evil Power Master, had every single choice I would make, so that was easy for me to
yeah,
do.
but you
Well, you were
are
Zap
RPing
Brannigan.
a certain character, you see, so it's different. So, anyways,
But yeah, so I either have to give protagonist a 0 and style a 1, or protagonist a 1 and style a 0.
that's fine. Whichever one you put more weight into,
So
then
I like the thing, but I agree with you, Steve. I was totally removed from it being you, and if I'm supposed to be the protagonist, I didn't.
you're
feel
saying
like
they
that.
failed at that
Yeah,
job, and that's
So
fine.
I have to give it a 0 on that.
All right,
I would agree. I'm going to give protagonist a 0.
Veronica.
I want to give it a 1. I think it was successful.
See, I also too. Like I said, it depends on what side of the fence you fall, and I think I fall enough on that side.
And this is a
on the one side.
guide because that's what I got.
I think it's very heavily like it's easy to do that. It'd
I
be
think
difficult
it's
to get it out.
implied,
Of it.
but like it's the same. Like when I mentioned
I was trying to
do
look
you guys
for
know the
references.
Dr. Riddle that I'm referring to?
I am, yes.
Like, kid gets hit by a train and then says, your dad's dead and the doctor's operating on you. I can't do this. It's my kid. And everybody's like, oh, how could it possibly be? And it's his mother. Whatever. I don't think it actually says that this person that you are supposed to be is a guy. And I think
It never says it outright, but it's just like you're maybe somewhat like a natural bias, but it's
right, of
pretty
course,
clear.
because
because
you're in a band and like you have a girlfriend at some point, like in your fantasy, and
choose your mouth or
I
your body. Like I would just choose the mouth if I were a girl.
Sure.
Don't you think? I'm just saying.
I
choose the mouth always.
Saying.
Choosing the mouth right now. Like, here's the thing, right? Yeah, sure. While it's never that, like,
I'm just saying. Anyway,
it's just like I don't guarantee this, but I bet you guys heavily, if we could ever rectify this bet, that the author himself
we get Goldman on
possibly never considered it. Like, wasn't even an aspect going into it.
I bet you he did consider it. I bet you.
It feels like you should have writing this type of story, but I'm not sure if that's actually the case.
Thinking over it now, I'm thinking that at some point he had to make that consideration. To realize that anybody could be reading this. I have to go back and make sure that I don't have any references
that it's
to
completely neutral
or something, or like any references that like said this was a guy or a girl, and I'm not sure. Maybe there's a reference in there that says it's a guy. I don't think there is, though.
Well, you know what? Just to throw back to one of the scenes in the stories, when he finally meets this counselor, where he finally starts kind of turning his life up and changing it into the positive, the woman sits down on the bench that he's sitting on, and he punches her. No other action.
Or
nothing.
She punches her.
No. Well, yeah, exactly. Okay, so they punch her.
Right.
He or she, whatever. But if I were a girl and a guy punches me, I would have much more of a reaction than, what was that for? I would be more like, what the fuck? Let me get out of this bench and walk away.
So that's an argument for why you can be a girl.
That's what I'm supporting.
Yeah.
Yes. That scene, thinking back on it, I could see where you would get it being a girl, or could possibly be a girl.
We'll wrap this up quickly. At least this question.
All the time. I mean,
Ian.
But he has no free will, so we can't help it. So yeah, it mentions something like your lover from 4 or 6 years ago, which yes is still neutral, but I think like it sort of naturally defaulted to assume it's a male.
Right, but that might become part of the point. Like
it's whoever you are.
Like I said, that's the whole point of that riddle that I mentioned earlier. Sure. It was like, you're supposed to think that a doctor can only be a guy. Like, All
right. Well, it's playing on your biases, I guess, at the end of the day. And depends how much you buy into it or not. So we've answered protagonist at length. So let's move on to the next section. You must go to section... Next question.
Section supporting.
Yes, which is supporting characters. Veronica.
Okay. The characters, aside from the protagonist, which I believe is... he, she, now that I'm questioning that.
All right.
Let's see. We had
It's just you.
The other musician
Paul.
who passed away. Very brief time during the story. His wife, the widow.
Mm-hmm.
She was interesting because during the funeral, it looks like she's giving the person a hug, but she's very standoffish. It's certainly not friendly. It's certainly not, and there are no condolences on her part to him or her from losing.
May I interrupt you for a second, though?
Sure.
That could easily, though, be perspective and survivor guilt.
Right.
That she might have been friendly. Remember, he cut off all his friends, or he or she, it cut off all his friends.
You cut off all your friends.
You cut off all your friends.
If you choose to cut off all your friends.
So I could see that being, and you become homeless.
Maybe, but see, like, I don't want to get wrapped in a tangent, but you're just reading, like, could be survivors. It could be anything, I suppose, but
I think it's implied, though.
But then,
I never got that out of it, but or at least I did.
I would say so. I would say it's implied that, like, especially with the, like, you can't go around with any of your friends anymore because it reminds you of, like, your previous life, and, like, in that it goes into the psychology of surviving something like that for sure.
I
think there's like the implication of like having this very much deeper psychology of surviving something and everyone else dying. There's even the scene where you're with the nurse and she very obviously doesn't mention
she skirts around
whether
the
or not
issue,
anyone else is okay and survived or whatever. And one of the choices is if you ask about why she didn't mention this, and then the other choice is like if you completely ignore that because you're not even thinking about it, or like you have a mental block of it basically. So I think that that's. I don't think that that's too far fetched to imagine that your character is suffering.
Maybe it's there. I just didn't necessarily notice it myself or like think about it upon reading.
Just going back to the secondary characters, we then have all the counselors that he has encounters with in
various
different
groups.
scenarios.
The pilot, the son of a bitch,
Yes.
got you on that plane in the first place.
Right. And then at the end, the fellow homeless people in the home that are coming to you to ask questions.
The other destitute souls that you're
And
right.
thrown with.
Perhaps most importantly, the two redheads.
I'm going to give them a 0. They were all right.
Just them or all the secondary
All
characters?
of them. Not just the redheads. No.
What do you got
think
against
all of
redheads?
them.
Nothing. I love them.
No, I love them. Gingers have souls.
The rest of us don't, apparently.
Clearly.
Only gingers
Anyways.
have souls.
I don't think they did it for me. I think that the protagonist pretty much drove this story through from beginning to end, and while the only other secondary character that I would say maybe was built more and we learned a little bit more and, you know, helped the story along was the final Ginger, who
Yes.
gets him into the home and finally gets him into the seat at the concert, which again brings it to my favorite point of the story, which is where it comes to the
anecdote.
the anecdote at the
within the
very
story.
beginning. Right. I really liked that, and I liked her influence. And even at the very last scene, right before the conclusion, where she's standing with him and saying, you know, well, what's next? And she's like, well, it's your choice. And she just walks away. And I think she was the only one that I would give her a 1. She alone. Everyone else
Right,
was
that's
too empty.
sort of a tradition, a valid rule we have. If you think one standout secondary character deserves a 1, then you can give it a 1.
That's
So-
it. She's the only one.
So
Everyone else
are
was
you
lacking.
changing? You originally just said 0, but for her,
Everyone else but the second Ginger.
all right.
What are you giving supporting characters?
1.
Well, it doesn't matter. We can discuss this at the end. Everybody else has to talk about this a little bit too.
Well, being a destitute soul myself, and having gone through some periods of darkness, actually the entire scenes of him going through like shelter type situations and social workers, it rang very
Did you find a
true.
realistic depiction of that? Yes.
It felt he I have met this character before, and I have met people like him in that situation where life isn't pleasant and you're dealing with the cynicism, and you have the people there who are both pretending to try to get better. You have like the guy who asks everyone to sit 10 minutes of silence. His character is very much a real person that I've met before. Every single all the different personality types rang very true. So I have to give it a 1 overall for that.
It's interesting. So I initially, even though I recommend this story, I thought secondary characters were like, again, props / the weakest part. But perhaps having said that, they sort of round it out in a sense. They make it more realistic. Like, again, as we just discussed at length, the whole point is, at least ostensibly, to force you, the reader, to be you, the protagonist, or in the story at least. So they're sort of like orbiting around you. But I think they were fleshed out well enough, and perhaps like even if I personally haven't met them to say like, oh yeah, it was a well-drawn character, I think I'll give it credit enough on the broad front, even if I don't. Neither do I pick one specifically out, but I'll give them a 1 collectively.
I think I'm closest to you in that, Scott. I like these characters. I don't know if there was a specific standout supporting character. Maybe the social worker at the end,
The Ginger.
and maybe the other redhead as well, like the girlfriend who like you kind of really get to know, despite the fact that she's a fantasy.
In a brief
Of
flash.
yours.
Yes.
My argument for this would be that when you're in that kind of situation, there are so many moments of impressions of these people you meet that they don't really stand out with you in the long
There's not enough
term.
time to form
and they more take up caricature of
Right.
like this type of person, and I felt that it was very I don't know, it rang very true to me, having for what I
and that's
experienced.
completely valid.
Well, I can definitely appreciate that.
And I felt that the way it was described really dealt with that kind of just meeting these people briefly, them having a small little influence on your life, and then them being gone forever. So,
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I
having
think
said that,
I think that I'll give it perhaps a softer 1, but I'll definitely give it a 1 as well.
all right.
Veronica, where did you
Any
come
other
down?
final thoughts? I think she switched it to a 1. Yes.
for
For the
only
for Irene, I believe her name is Irene.
the second
Yes.
Ginger.
i.e. the second gender, apparently.
All right. You're
All right.
limited to one. All right. Got it.
Brings us to dialogue, which is on me. Again, another difficult-ish one, because there are spoken lines, but it's mostly expository, I guess I want to say. But again, because of the nature of how the framework of the story is set up, try to get you into it. So I guess where I come down in this one is there was nothing really it's kind of forgettable, although that isn't the point. But neither can I give it credit for just writing, serviceable dialogue in this case. I'll probably give points to style and not dialogue. It was maybe what you're going to say.
A while back, we did a review of the I, Sylvia, whatever the title of that was. But we all thought that it had dialogue in it, but it turned out it didn't. This one, it had dialogue in it, but I forgot that it had dialogue in it. So, I don't know. That's a bad sign.
It's an interesting case. Sure.
Yeah.
Sort of a different version of that.
I would completely agree with that. The dialogue was perhaps the weakest part of this story, and I like this.
I probably agree with that.
I really like the story, but I don't care about the dialogue. Like, the dialogue moved the story from point A to point B, and that was it. There was nothing. Yeah. There's no flair to it. It wasn't like amazing or anything like that.
I feel like the conversations with the protagonist were like talking to a teenager. He's there. He's not really paying attention, but he's annoyed more you trying to get through to
or
them,
bored or whatever,
and bored and very dismissive. And while I understand that this is not the situation that a teenager would be, maybe they are, but the point is that it's as if I was talking to a teenager and trying to get through to them the entire story. It was very frustrating.
So you did not like it on that.
So I
that
would give it a 0.
All right.
Sounds like we're going zeros across the board on dialogue, right?
I think so. Yeah. All right, brings us to the style, Steve-O.
Oh, the style. This whole short story, was built on the conceit of like doing a choose your own adventure, which was pulled off really well. I think that's pretty much the only thing I'm going to say about the style. Like I thought that it did a really good job of that.
There ain't much more to say. I
don't
agree
think
with that.
that there was much
agree.
else
Yeah.
in terms of style that really mattered.
That was the style.
Yeah.
That's it.
Again, as you just referenced in the eye, it's not the same case, but it's something similar where the nature of it requires the style. It lives or dies upon the style itself, and I think you did a good job within that framework.
And on the strength of that, I think that did a really good job. I don't know if we are even going to get into like a lengthy discussion on this. I don't think there's much.
I don't think it's necessary. Yes.
That's it.
So,
no, I'm good.
Same thing. All right.
I'm giving it a 1.
That's ones all across the board on style.
You're agreeing with that,
Yes.
Ian?
Yep. All right, Veronica, what's your final impression of the Axiom of Choice and/or recommendation of it? Would you recommend it, in fact?
Final impression.
To whom and why?
Okay, well,
Optional.
it was enjoyable. Give or take a couple things that kind of made it drag.
A couple missteps, maybe.
I understand that it needed to be included to kind of get the point across, or the story, or add a little tidbit about the title into the story and how it all kind of came together. Overall, I was impressed. I would recommend this, but it would not be highly recommended. So
right.
I will give
Wouldn't it be your first recommendation?
No,
Fair
it
enough.
would be a very, very, very soft one.
All right. Perfectly fine.
Fair enough.
I think this is a lot of style over substance. If this didn't have the unique style to it, it wouldn't be a good story at all.
I agree. It probably wouldn't work,
And
but since it does.
It does,
at
and
least.
it's unique, it's clever, and I can imagine actually a number of people I could recommend this to for just the sheer uniqueness of what it's doing. So I have to give it a 1 for
All
that.
right.
I would agree with that. I think that you need to... I think that in terms of stories that do something a little bit different, I'm always looking for something like that. And like reading this was kind of a breath of fresh air. The story was good. It wasn't amazing. But the style of it, the choose your own adventure part of it, really put it over the top, I think. And I really enjoyed reading it. It made I don't know how long this is, maybe 20 pages or something like that.
Like
It didn't
that.
feel that long.
It didn't feel very long.
It kind of breezes by, but again, because of the structure
it goes
of it.
quickly, and I never felt like it was dragging or anything like that. So I enjoyed it, and I definitely would recommend it to people.
I, of course, already recommended it to you guys. So, yeah. But, because I thought you would enjoy what it was trying to do, even if, like we just said, it had some... It fell flat, maybe, or not even fell flat, but just misstepped here and there.
Right.
But it still holds together roughly overall. If not even roughly, just broadly. The intent of it, the way it's pulled off, and sort of, yes, however deeply or not, some of the concepts it tries to introduce and expose you to, at least, you can give it credit on that front. All right. So the final scores are, I gave it the highest with a 9. Steve-O and Veronica both gave it a matching 8, and Ian gave it a 7, as always.
A curmudgeonly old 7.
But maybe he can't help it.
You kids.
It's determined that he has to give this...
He can't help it.
Choose your own adventures.
Yes, well, we are all choosing to give it an 8 overall, which I think is pretty respectable. I think it's a neat little, again, sort of experiment, which with more depth to it than perhaps it seems on the surface, but it will depend your own subjectivity, how much depth actually you get out of it. So I think that'll do it. I am choosing to sign off from Scott Thurlow here at the Lost Signals. See you next time.
All right, have a good night.
This is Bruno. Thanks for having me again.
This is Jonathan Manzer, and if you'd like to continue, take an introduction to metaphysics class.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
Music and editing by Chris Morgan.
Lots to do about nothing.
This has been a Lost Signals production. All rights reserved.